Good evening, everyone. My name is Louise Richardson. I'm delighted to give you a very warm welcome, both to those of you here in the Sheldonian, as well as to those of you listening online. This is truly a hybrid event, truly a first. This event is part of a series of events taking place to celebrate the centenary of the admission of women to Oxford. Oxford is so old, we don't quite know how old, but somewhere in the region of 800 to 900 years old. And for 700 to 800 of those years, women were not allowed to be members of the university. I have often wondered how many books would have been written, musical scores composed, inventions created, poems written, if women had had access to the same education as men for all those years. But in the 1870s, as part of the university's general drive for extension and extramural lecturing, some courses were established for local women. And then, in 1879, the first two women's halls were established, Somerville and Lady Margaret Hall. They had an odd position in the university. They had no royal charter, little or no endowment, no fellows, and no defined status. They became new foundations in the 1920s and only received equal status to other colleges in the late 1950s. From the mid-1880s, however, women were permitted to sit university exams, to attend university lectures, if the lecturer consented, as many did not, and to attend lectures in some male colleges, though never mixed tutorials. Many did very well in those exams, but they could not get their degrees. One of my favorite stories of this period is of the steamboat ladies. Trinity College Dublin, which is my alma mater, permitted women to matriculate in 1904, but they didn't have their first cohort of women graduating until 1908. And yet historically, Trinity, Oxford and Cambridge have recognized one another's degrees. So the very clever and enterprising women who had studied at both Oxford and Cambridge realized that they could actually pick up the degrees in Trinity for the work they had done at Oxford. Now, there was just a 3-year period during which this loophole worked, because then in 1908, Trinity was graduating its own women. So in that 3-year period, over 700 women who had studied in either Oxford or Cambridge took the steamboat to Dublin, had a ceremony, paid a fee, and got their degrees from Trinity College Dublin for the work that they had done in Oxford and Cambridge. Now, the fact that so many women did that shows just how important it was to them to get the official recognition of the work that they had done. And these women were an extraordinary group, went on to found many of the great women's schools in the country, and indeed many had quite distinguished careers. So we've come a long way since then, but the pace has been slow. Women were finally admitted, as we know, to be full members of the university in the academic year 1920-21. The first female professor was appointed in 1948, and the first female VC in 2016. And just recently, the number of female undergraduates has surpassed the number of male undergraduates. So to help us explore how far we've come and where we are today, we have a wonderful panel for you that will be chaired by a very recognizable figure, none other than Reeta Chakrabarti. Reeta read English and French at Exeter College. She, as you know, is a journalist, presenter, and correspondent for BBC News, having previously served as education correspondent and covered politics from Westminster. And last year, she was appointed Chancellor of the University of York. So over to you, Reeta.
Thank you very much, Louise. It is extraordinary, isn't it, to think that women have only been able to get their degrees from Oxford for 100 years. It's a sentence that doesn't make much sense to me. I'm joined on the stage by 3 women who have so made up for lost years that it is, it blows me away to look at their biographies, and you're going to hear what they've achieved and what they think about their time here and also about their careers and the way in which social changes are happening. So let me introduce them. Baroness Hunt of Bethnal Green. Ruth was here in the 1990s. She is the co-director of Deeds and Words, which works with individuals and organisations to help create a shared sense of purpose. She became a peer in October 2019, and prior to joining Deeds and Words, she was the chief executive of Stonewall, which is the UK's largest charity campaigning for equality for lesbian, gay, bi and trans people. Dr. Anne-Marie Imafedon is an extraordinary prodigy. Aged 11, she was the youngest girl ever to pass A-level computing. And at just 20, she received her master's degree in maths and computer science from the University of Oxford. She's then gone on to work at Goldman Sachs, at Hewlett-Packard, and at Deutsche Bank. But I first encountered her when I was reporting on education, and I came across this group, STEMettes, which Anne-Marie co-founded, and it's a social initiative that is dedicated to inspiring and pushing forward the next generation of young women in the STEM sectors, and STEM is science, technology, engineering, and maths. V. Kativu, to my left, is, says here she's a YouTube visionary. You're an education activist and founder of the initiative Empowered by V. So she uses her platform to share tips and advice to help underprivileged and underrepresented people from across the world recognise their own talent and potential. She's an Oxford graduate of classical archaeology and ancient history, and you're presently at Harvard studying international education policy. She's set up her own YouTube channel. I've had a watch. It's very compelling. Let's start. The way this is going to run is that we're going to talk to each other for about 40 minutes, and then I'm going to put questions to them that you have sent in, either people who are here with us in the room or people who are watching online. So please do join in sending in any questions. But I'd like to start, first of all, what you all share is that you studied at Oxford. Ruth, if you just start off by telling me about your experience as a student here, what was it like?
Well, I didn't realise before I came here that I would be the elder in the group. So Anne-Marie and V are younger than me, which I think that's the first time I've experienced that as an alumni in these events. So I'm now the old one. So I matriculated in '98, graduated in 2001. Went on to do a year in the Student Union as President of the Student Union from 2001 to 2002. And when I came to Oxford in '98, I was the first in my family to go to university at 18. My mum had gone as a mature student, and Oxford was a very long way away from my family. It was frightening and a bit scary, and everyone was like, oh dear, now off to Oxford, whatever next. But for me, I was openly gay at that stage, so I came out when I was 14, had done time at school. It was the time of Section 28, where talking about homosexuality was not permissible in schools. So coming to Oxford was a moment of extraordinary liberation and freedom for me. I not only was allowed to be clever, and I think that's rare. It didn't feel possible at school to be quite as clever and precocious as I wanted to be. And under the tutelage of Professor Sally Mapstone, I was certainly allowed to be as clever as I wanted to be. I was also allowed to be as gay as I wanted to be. And there's something about having some disposable income, a room in college, and access to other women that is quite exciting. And I think I'm not alone as an 18-year-old in being quite excited by that. So I had a great time, and I lived the life of Riley, to be frank, and loved my degree, loved my college. I was at St Hilda's College, and really got a huge amount out of it. That doesn't mean that I have rose-tinted glasses about what it was like to be, I doubt my parents would describe it as such, but working class in 1998, gay, finding my way through. It certainly had some moments where I wasn't sure of myself, but I would unequivocally say that I wouldn't be where I am today without my degree at Oxford, and I'm incredibly proud of the institution and my time here.
You must have been very confident as a person.
I must have been.
You must have been very confident as a person to have come from a family where no one had been to university. You aimed for Oxford, you were out at a time that it might have been difficult to be.
I think I was, and I'm sure a part of it was bravado and a little bit of front. But I do remember in my interview. I mean, I remember my interview very clearly. Sally Mapstone saying, so what are you reading in your spare time? And I said, oh, Virginia Woolf. And she said, why Virginia Woolf? And I said, well, I thought it would impress you. And she was like, well, if you're in Cambridge, my dear. And I thought, like, I didn't understand that joke. So I kind of, I was trying to work the system. And I guess there's something about being different and other, where you learn to work a system. And so I certainly saw Oxford as an institution I wanted to adapt in order to fit, and did that. But I also think the collegiate environment did me well. I think I would have got lost on a large campus university. I think there was something about knowing I knew everybody in my year. I knew the 12 people in my English set. You know, it's very intimate from that sense, and I think that suited me very well. But yeah, I'm sure I had some arrogance. I think it would have probably been described in 1998. But confidence is also a feminist interpretation of that front, I suspect.
I've given you the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you very much. Reeta.
So it is, the collegiate system is a family environment which can either really boost you and be comforting, or it could be claustrophobic. What was it like for you, Anne-Marie?
For me, it was incredibly comforting. And I think I grew up in East London. My parents had been to university, but they hadn't been to Oxford. And so for me, it was nice to come here as someone that was slightly younger than everyone else and have literally a ready-made family. You know, we have the college parents. I remember my parents very fondly. I had college grandparents, you know, and we'd all kind of look out for each other. So for me, it was a home away from home that I had to settle into. So I remember, you know, we're in East London, we're on one of the major A roads, and so it's really, really loud where I live. And I remember coming to college the first couple of nights and not being able to sleep because I was quad-side, and it was silent. I was like, I can't sleep with this silence. I just can't do it. So I think there are certain things that were tough to kind of get used to. You know, there was the upside of the fact that in hall, when I finished my food, people would clear food away, because at Keble we had formal hall every day, which I didn't have at home, so that was great. But the downside, I guess, was the food. I wasn't necessarily used to all of it, and so, as I tell people all the time, I spent a lot of time in Nando's on George Street, just kind of eating things that would make me feel like I was at home in London. But I think, yeah, having that family around, having those small, intimate groups, and I think, you know, some of us are really fortunate in that, being in those small groups, like you say, they work. You know, I didn't feel like other in my tutes, with the senior fellow or anyone else on my course, and it was something I was really conscious of coming up. You know, not just being younger, but being from the background that I was from.
How old were you?
So I was 17 eventually when I actually came up, because then my family didn't have to move with me, which is what it would have been if I came up earlier. But I think it was something where sometimes being the odd one out didn't mean what you'd imagine it would mean. So in my college, my senior tutor happened to be the senior fellow for the bell ringing society that we have here at Oxford University. And there was someone else in my year and the year ahead of me in the same course that were also parts and then members of the bell ringing society. And I remember thinking, wow, what a thing to not have in common with the other people in the room. Bell ringing. You know, this isn't the yachts that I thought it would be, right? Or the private schools I thought it would be. It's bell ringing. And I think, you know, things like that were like, you know, these are still people. I'm different from them in some ways, but actually we're all here for the love of maths or the love of computer science. And so I ended up feeling really, really comfortable in college. I ended up, it was home, you know, it's still something that now when I go back, you feel like you're, you know, some things might have been painted, but you still feel like you're back. So I think for me, I had a really, really fortunate, I was really fortunate in that experience, but I think it also, looking back, meant that I was able to be myself, because if I'm one of fewer people in that room, then what I bring into that room is heard more, and it's encountered more, and it's part of people's experience. And so I look back really fondly on my time in college and on my time, you know, in lectures and the rest of it.
I want to ask the same question to V in a moment, but just when we were speaking a little bit earlier, you said something really interesting about in the places that you knew, you felt completely at home, but if you stepped outside of them, you would have that sense of being somebody different.
Yes, being different or being other. And I think it was something that almost kind of initially, we spoke about rose-tinted glasses, you kind of come up and you're like, you know, as if I'm at the Oxford, you know, this is my room at the Oxford. And you're so excited and overwhelmed by being there that if things don't go your way, or if you're treated negatively in certain environments, you're still excited about being at the Oxford, that you're almost able to brush that off. But the longer I was here, the more that then you'd venture out of college, or you'd go to slightly different lectures or whatever it might be. And I remember, if people ask me, what was it like? What was it really like? And they're almost fishing for things. I think the older I've got, the more I've been able to look back and think, there was a time, and I won't name the college, there were particular colleges that I'd go and visit, that if I was in the JCR with one of my friends and we were eating food, for example, there was one occasion where we were kind of enjoying ourselves, and kind of two folks came in, took one look at us and then left, and about 15 minutes later a porter came by and kind of just came in and had a look and went, oh, brilliant, and kind of thumbs up at my friend and said, oh, someone had come in and said that there are people who weren't supposed to be here, in here. And so he'd come ready to kind of evict us or who knows what. But I think it was the same thing with particular colleges, again, heading in there if you're going to study with a friend and being accosted by different members of staff or people not assuming that you're a student there, right, and thinking that there's other reasons that you might be in that space, was something that then did happen from time to time. And it's not something I look back on and it's the only thing I remember about being in Oxford, but I think it is something for us to kind of consider and to think about that othering, that maybe it's not just, you've got a wider sphere of influence maybe than you recognise, and so it's not just about how you are with your colleagues and the people that you're supposed to be with, but how are you treating the others that are also in this space. And I think it's something that I'd love to see the right kind of progress on that for women in technical spaces, for black people, for people, all kinds of, all the different protected characteristics. But it is something that we have kind of round the edges, and we'd be doing all of this a disservice if we didn't talk about what needs to be done and flipped for kind of what comes next.
So interesting that you say it's almost retrospectively that you recognise, now that wasn't quite right. Now V, your retrospect is much shorter than ours because you graduated in 2019, so you're bang up to date. 2020, even more up to date. What was it like for you?
My experience was, I would say overall, an incredible experience because it was university, right? It wasn't just Oxford University, it was I'm going to university. So that within itself was extremely exciting, but it was definitely a different experience because I started in Oxford in 2016 on a foundation year course, and it was the first time that had ever been ran. We were called the pioneers, some people called us the guinea pigs, whatever words you were using, we were the first to do that, and there were only 10 students on that course. So the experience, even though I was a fresher and I was just going to university, I was also going to university as a group of a very small minority of people in the whole university, only 10 of us, and we were only in Lady Margaret Hall. So it was very specific, and I mean, that definitely made me feel different on top of being a black student from a working class background, but it wasn't necessarily a bad difference. I mean, that foundation year course for me was the catalyst of so much that's gone on to happen in my life. Like, I gained so much self-confidence from that, and academic confidence, because prior to coming to Oxford, I feel like in my schooling, I wasn't necessarily seen or heard. My teachers wanted me to just pass, and it was that kind of thing where you might have gotten an A in your A-levels the year previous, but now you're sitting next to someone who might have gotten a D and the teacher's teaching at B-level. So you're not necessarily seen or pushed, and it's not their fault. They're just dealing with the resources I've got. And then coming to Oxford, being one of this group of 10, getting this very, very specialized and intimate education, it was a big shock factor. It was amazing. I mean, my mom will tell you, she's in the audience, but I used to get in trouble at school a lot, and when I was younger, for talking too much. That was always on the report cards, great grades, great everything, she just needs to give others a chance. So when I came to Oxford, you're asking me to speak more? You want to hear from me? This was great. I was in heaven. So that foundation year was incredible. I mean, I would say it was 90% positive, 10% bad, but that's with everything you get in life. Because we were the first, there were little things like, you'd want to go and use the library, and they're like, wait, you're a student? But they hadn't heard of it either, so people weren't well informed on it. Lady Margaret Hall knew exactly what we were doing because they started it, but when you ventured out of Lady Margaret Hall, people always questioned it a lot, and they'd be like, foundation years, so you're underprivileged and you need extra help, and there were lots of questions because it was very new. So I guess that was the only thing I didn't like, is that I wish people had been a little bit more, now they are. Now I think it's you know, more widely received. Oxford is running it uni-wide. I'm so proud to see that, and I'm so happy to have been a part of that change. But when we were here as the group of the first, it was difficult, but it was positive too. So after I finished that foundation year course, I then reapplied and went on to my undergraduate course here at Oxford from 2017 to 2020, and it was just great. Like, I honestly just felt like I found myself. I found what my limits are, what my beliefs are. I found my weaknesses, my strengths, and like what these guys were saying, you know, you have that college family system, and I'm still close to my college mom, my college dad, and my college siblings, and it was just, Oxford is different. It's different, and it was amazing. And obviously you spoke about the YouTube channel, and that's why I began it, because every time I'd go back home, everyone's like, what do you eat there? Is it lobster? Do they wear Harry Potter gowns? It was just this crazy place, you know, so I started documenting it on YouTube and sharing my experience being unapologetically me, a young black girl from Dudley, single-parent household, just being myself and getting great grades and showing others you could do it too. So I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't have had a good experience. You know, I couldn't encourage someone else to come to a place that I'd hated. I couldn't have done that, so yeah.
Wow, fantastic. So, you know, all three of you have had a good experience at Oxford. And I was wondering, is there any, I mean, there has been a bit of grit in the oyster, but not that much, and not as women, I think. So I am the eldest here by far. I was an undergraduate here in the 80s, and I was the 5th or 6th year of intake of women at Exeter. And we were a third women by then, so it's 2/3 men, a third women. And I went to Exeter without knowing any of this. I had none of the baggage, none of the background. So as far as I was concerned, we were just students. But you did over time understand that actually you were quite outnumbered. There was quite a male culture. Did you find that? You're at St Hilda's, Ruth, so maybe that didn't apply so much?
Well, it did. I mean, so 1990, I went to St Hilda's quite deliberately, and in part because there was no sandstone buildings and quads, which I found just quite overwhelming. I liked St Hilda's that it was a bit beyond. I liked that it was an all-women's college. But I know that I would never have been JCR president, so president of the junior common room, in one of the mixed colleges. So if I'd gone to Christchurch, I think, I mean, how much of this is perception bias and how much of it is real, I don't know. I think I probably would have been all right in Wadham, but no one tells the kids that Wadham is the good college for queer kids, and you just don't know that stuff if you don't know it. So having met the other JCR presidents in other colleges, I was one of very few women. And I know that I wouldn't have gone down as well in another college. And of course, if I hadn't been JCR president, I wouldn't have been AUSU president. So, and we had a documentary crew with us at St Hilda's. Channel 4 made 6 films called College Girls. That was on Channel 4. I mean, the act of being observed does change the subject. I mean, it's a slightly surreal thing to have done at 18. And they filmed 6 of us, and it was very much about this unique experience of being a woman at Oxford. So I think I was acutely aware of gender as a dynamic at Oxford then. Very aware that I was lucky that I had all-female tutors when most of my peers and others didn't. But St Hilda's at that time, you know, we had a president of the union, president of the student union, president of the boat club. Hilda's was producing leaders. Annalisa Dodds, who's just been shifted, was the president in the year above me. You know, so St Hilda's produced these women leaders that you didn't see in other colleges, and that was in part to do with the fact that we had an environment where that was possible. So I think I was more aware of gender than I might have been. I think. Interesting. And just briefly, do you bemoan the fact that most of the women's colleges are now mixed? Yes, I do. Yes. And I think that's as much for, I think, you know, particularly at St Hilda's, there were lots of Muslim students who came and studied here. It was a very accessible college, and also lots of girls and women from non-traditional backgrounds who didn't know, because Dad hadn't gone to Christchurch and Grandad hadn't gone to Christchurch. So you just didn't. So that it felt a very almost Hufflepuff environment. Do you know what I mean? Where everybody could just come and be and learn. And I think it's a deep shame that doesn't exist. I think it's a shame Somerville went. I think Somerville should be our single-sex college remaining. I think Somerville always had a slightly more political edge, but I think it's a real shame, yeah. Okay.
Anne-Marie, I was wondering if you could reflect on being a woman at Oxford, but also apply it a little bit to what you've gone on and done, because you have pushed the boundaries of what's expected of women. And how did your experience then inform that?
Yeah, so it's funny, as Ruth was saying, it reminded me, I originally wanted to apply for to St Hilda's, but knew I wanted to do maths and computer science, and it wasn't an option in the year that I was applying for me to go to Hilda's and do that. And I think Keble was the next one alphabetically that was available. So that, I mean, I try not to say this too often because the Kebelites won't like it, and I love being an honorary fellow there. So, so for me, being at Keble, it was great as well. It was fantastic geographically for maths and computer science. It was fantastic. I did maths and computer science, as I keep saying, and so the maths group of kind of 10-ish was majority female, and we had a woman, she's still there, Gesine Reinhardt, senior fellow looking after our mathematics. So for me, in that bubble, and I think this is kind of coming back to that being in that family, in that space, for me, that was Oxford. I had a senior tutor that was female who was running the whole show. We had a lot of girls that were in my course, in my college, obviously not necessarily in lectures, but on the computer science side, I was the only girl. And in our lectures, and it's something I talk about, you know, now all the time as I'm running STEMettes and talking about my experience and my journey, there were 70 of us in computer science lectures, and of the 70, it was myself, Clarice, and Karina across the entire university. So it was 3 of us in lectures for 3 years until...
Only 3 girls?
Just 3 girls, 70. Yeah. And it's so funny because it didn't weigh on us that we were the women to represent. So, you know, don't say anything silly in lectures or in shoots or in, you know, practicals because you're the women and you're representing all women. We didn't feel it like that. It was more just, oh, how's Karina kind of thing, or how's Clarice? And we didn't sit next to each other. We weren't kind of, I don't know, I'm thinking Greece, I don't know why, but, you know, we weren't like the pink ladies of computer science. But we did have that affinity and we did rely on each other in some ways. But, you know, I spent most of my time with the boys on the course, whether it was in shoots, whether it was kind of studying outside, because it was mostly boys on the course, right? And so I think it's something that, like I continually say, I'm really fortunate that I didn't even notice, for example, that in the comm lab, when I was studying there, there weren't ladies' loos. And I didn't realise, and it's so funny, like I said, you're there and you're excited about the comp or the whatever, and you don't even notice that, you know, you're using that loo and they've just about managed to change the sign on the loo from male, and they've kind of either removed it or they've said all gender, and that was the thing. And again, it wasn't until computer science were going up for their Athena Swan Award that I got a call. And kind of someone there was like, yeah, and do you remember the loos? And I was like, oh yeah, it's funny you say that, yeah. Yes. Or when we were doing practicals, it was ladies' loos were every other, or, you know, they just weren't as important. So I think it was an interesting one looking back where, again, I wasn't fully made to feel like other to the point that I was uncomfortable, but there were signs there were certain things where actually, it's just the 3 of you across the whole university.
And have you any idea what it's like now?
I don't, so the numbers haven't moved amazingly. They've got better. They have got better, and there are more academics that are women as well. And that was something that I definitely noticed as well towards the end of my time. So I was the MPLS, so Mathematical, Physical and Life Sciences, which is the kind of STEM group here. I was the undergrad rep. And I think it was interesting to see the changes as they were coming in, that kind of, when I started off in the meetings with all the senior academics, it was all the old blokes that you'd imagine you'd have at a computer science department anywhere. And then towards the end, there would be women that would kind of start to filter in. And so kind of when I did my dissertation, I did that under Marina Girotka, and there were quite a lot of women that kind of then were also promoted within the department. And so there was progress for them. But I think it's something that, you know, informs so much of what I do in my work at STEMettes, which is it shouldn't be, I kind of say this all the time, I was very unperceptive. I mean, I'm going to come out and say it. I mean, child genius, yes, but a lot of things I just didn't notice. You just don't see because you're so focused on, will this algorithm work, or how do I solve this formula, that you don't kind of look up and you're like, what? You know, if we were going to play patterns here and odd one out, I'm the odd one out every single time. Every time I do anything, you know, I can imagine in the House of Lords it's the same thing, but on all the boards and all the things in the tech world, it's the same thing. If you look in on the room, you're always going to spot Anne-Marie. I mean, I've almost got the grey hair now, So I've got something in common with some of the other folks that, you know, I might come across. And so I think it's, I always say, why do you shouldn't have to be as unperceptive as me to be able to engage with the technology, or to be able to engage with the maths, or to be able to engage with the computer science. We shouldn't just say, Anne-Marie did it, and so it's fine. And if you want to be that computer scientist, Anne-Marie did it, and it's okay. It's like, no. Other folks who have a different placement in their sense of identity, who may be kind of women, them being a woman, them being a girl, is slightly more important than them loving Nando's, being from East London, being black, whatever it might be. Different folks should be able to come into that space and feel comfortable, because this isn't about them and their identity, this is about what they're studying. But also we need different types of folks to shape the future, because ultimately that's what we do as computer scientists, as folks in STEM, as folks in humanities. But this is about the future, this is about those future leaders, this is about decisions that are being made, this is about how well you're able to reflect society and the things that you're building and the problems that you're solving, how you prioritize the problems that get solved. You know, there's all these things where actually you need different types of folks to feel comfortable in that space and to feel a sense of belonging, to enrich what you're doing and to make it more useful. Because if you do end up just kind of, there's so many random things that we built on our course, and it's like, you know, if you think of all the problems that there are in the world, we definitely could have spent some time solving those and thinking about those, rather than doubling down on, and this is really mean of me, but doubling down on bell ringing as an example, right? If you've got that broad perspective and that broad sense of what's going on, it enriches your learning, and it also enriches the utility that you have to society, which I think is something that, coming from Oxford, I think if there's anything I've learned from here is there's so much that we can do, there's so many problems to be solved, and we're the ones that are going to do it, we're the ones that are going to end up running the country in different ways. And so you have to have the right people going into that to then go out and have the right kind of influence on
I was going to say, you shouldn't have to look up from your algorithm. You shouldn't have to do it. You should be able to just concentrate on what you want to do without thinking about, you know, the makeup of the university. Anyway, you are engaged in demystifying Oxford, aren't you? You're saying to people, come on, I'm here, you can be too. What sort of response do you get?
Well, I mean, the response is crazy, because when I started documenting my journey at Oxford, I was mainly doing it because, like I said, whenever I'd go home, all of these questions were coming in, and I thought, something's wrong here. There's a gap between your thinking that Oxford is planet Mars and that you can't be there, and what Oxford actually is. So I wanted to kind of help be a bridge between that, right? And when I started it, I really thought maybe 100 people, maybe 200 people might need that. I never would have thought that we would be with 200,000 student subscribers right now, which, yes, it's great that we have a community that big, but also that's not good, because why are there 200,000 students who feel like they need that resource, right? So I think the response has been bigger than I would have ever thought it could be. There are hundreds of messages that come in on a weekly basis, daily basis. And I mean, it's sad, but I'm also very glad that these students now have each other to talk to. And the Empowered by V platform that I build is so that students can lean on each other, so that you can kind of break down those barriers to say, actually, you don't have to be a unicorn or be incredibly great for you to be here. Like, you are good enough as you are. Like, you do deserve a space here if you want to. If you care about your education, you're passionate about your subject, why can't you be here? Because of your background, your household income, because your school might not have enough resources. It's not entirely fair. So I think the response on the channel has been crazy, and I'm so glad that so many students are now feeling empowered to reach for whatever their version of Oxford is. Sometimes it's not necessarily just about Oxford, it could be any other university, but obviously in my context I speak from experience, and it is Oxford. And I just hope that students feel that they're good enough, that they can occupy a space here, that they can become a future leader too if they come to this place, and that they can enjoy it. And like what these guys have been saying, students should be able to, you know, come here and just focus on their education, come and enjoy yourself, be a student. And I sometimes think it's a shame that a lot of students, especially of the African and Caribbean societies or of those kinds of backgrounds, have to come here and then do activism work, and I know that a lot of students want to get involved in that, but you shouldn't necessarily have to. And I felt that obligation. I felt like there is no way I'm going to come here and then not try and help open the doors for my other brothers and sisters out there, because you feel like, wait, why am I one of few? I always, kind of like what you're saying, I always felt like the odd one out in many situations, especially in my degree. Classical archaeology and ancient history was not the most diverse of degrees in the world, right? But I was like, but why not? Why can't young black girls come and study this? Like, why, you should have that option and those choices. So I think I'm very, very involved in the student community, and I hear their thoughts all the time, and they always say, yes, I've got the grades, but I just don't feel like I'd belong. And it's that feeling, it matters, right? You don't want to feel out of place somewhere. So those are my thoughts on that.
So you're telling people you can come and you can be yourself.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can be the person that you are and not feel that you have to fit into some stereotype.
I wish that when people are applying for university and considering Oxford, their first thoughts are, will I like the college, will I like my degree? And those are the things I'm basing on. And if I got the grades, I've got the grades, great. I hope that they're not thinking about their skin color, that they're not thinking, oh no, like they're not going to take me because my hair is in dreadlocks, because my hair is in braids. Am I going to get stopped? Will they think I don't fit in? I don't want those things to factor in, but they do. That is a big decision-making factor in a lot of people's things. And even food, you spoke about food. Will I be able to cook the food I want to cook and not have a million questions? Can I change my hair and put it back in an afro and braids without someone coming to try and touch it? Can I go to any college in Oxford and not be stopped? That happened to me a few times, and I was like, I've been taking classes here for the past 2-3 weeks. It's a whole term that I'm taking classes, and every few weeks you stop me. But I can see my friends walking in.
So you're stopped from going into the college?
Yeah, some porters will stop you like, sorry, like, what are you here for? And I can see people who are tourists with cameras just walking in, like they're clearly not a student. You can tell by the cameras and the excitement. And I've got a backpack and I'm holding books. Why are you stopping me again? And it could be the same porter. You're like, hey, we've done this already. So I think those little things are what can make a difference in someone's experience or desire to come here. And it shouldn't be that way. It should really be about your books, your subject. Do you want to ride bikes? Go to the lake and do the Oxfordy things, So that's the feedback I get from the student community. Those are their worries, and it's a shame sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ruth, you had a great time here. You came with all your confidence and your arrogance, and you got on well. How has that provided a basis for what you've gone on to do?
Well, I think I a bit like V, I realised that there was a need to be an activist, that I had to use the platform that had been afforded to me to do something with that. And certainly did that through student politics and then through joining Stonewall. And I joined Stonewall very young. I did a couple of years at Oxford, actually, in Wellington Square. I did university admin. I think I'd fallen in love with someone who was staying in Oxford, so I thought I should stay in Oxford and all that stuff. And also I loved Oxford. Oxford was the first place I'd feel able to be myself. So when I joined Stonewall at 25, it was very much about I needed to do everything I could to create a world that I hadn't had. So how could I get resources into every library? Because if my mum and dad could have gone to Cardiff Library and found something, that would have helped them. All we had was Beth Jordache on Brookside killing her dad. Do you know what I mean? All we had Jeanette Winterson. And Jeanette Winterson going to Oxford in Orange is Not the Only Fruit is what made me feel I could go to Oxford. Really? So I had Jeanette Winterson. And Orange is Not the Only Fruit is not the lightest of books for baby lesbians. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a great entry-level text. So I kind of was really aware that I needed to get stuff out there and use that force for good. And I kind of slotted into that role, and Baroness Royal, Jan Royal's here, and she's in the Lords with me and is incredibly supportive. And I think what's interesting about the Lords is that I feel a bit like I'm back in that 18-year-old position again, a bit too gay, a bit too, I just need to kind of learn the rules again. And what's interesting about the Lords is that black peers get stopped and asked for their pass more than white peers, and black people get chivied along and told to speed up their speeches and closing when white people don't. And it's a quad, like the quads, and the buildings are the same, and the artwork is the same, and the brickwork is the same, and the colours are the same, and the men are the same, and the ways of talking are the same. I'm just in a grown-up version of the union. The alcohol is subsidised, there are places I can't go, I don't know whether I should go left or right and which cafe I'm allowed into. So in a way I feel I'm slightly triggered, do you know what I mean? I'm like, oh my God, I'm back. And I'm a bit uncertain and I don't really know the rules and I don't know what to say, but I need to brazen it out again. So there's a kind of, I wouldn't have done that without Oxford. And I wouldn't have had the confidence to be in that space without Oxford. And I wouldn't have learned how to bullshit my way through in the way I learned at Oxford. But I think what I'm struck by about that in terms of the future generations is we are creating those leaders who exist well in those spaces. It's the same if you're a barrister, there are quads, there are buildings, there are, we just keep replicating these institutions. Eton looks the same. We provide a very safe space to lead when you're familiar with these institutions. So every time someone like me or Anne-Marie and Vi come and disrupt that institution and fit ourselves into it, we are continuing to disrupt. And I think that that means that Oxford massively underestimates its power. Because Oxford, you're there at a formative stage in your life where we could disrupt what comfortable looks like. We could, I really want to come back to Oxford and work at some point in my career. My partner doesn't want to come. And my partner's not Oxford, and we come here and visit, and she runs, and she doesn't know where she's allowed to run. So she can't just run, because she turns left and you're not allowed on that bit of gravel, and you're not allowed on that bit of grass, and you're not allowed down that. Like, everything about this place is designed to understand the unwritten rules. And I think if we're going to create the leaders of the future that this country and this world deserves, Oxford needs to be innovative in how it disrupts what normal looks like, and what normal ways of working looks like, and what normal thinking looks like. And then the Lords would look different, and the law would look different, and the media would look different. And I think Oxford has such immense power to disrupt, and I think it doesn't grasp that power with the enthusiasm it could. And I think that's a shame.
I wonder, can an institution disrupt itself, or is it not up to individuals to do that? But I might ask Anne-Marie that question.
So it's fun. It's a discussion I've had, and it's something. So I'm on the Council at Research England now, and there's a lot that we're looking at kind of across research. And it's so funny because you said disrupt the norm, and I think we're in a we're really fortunate to be able to disrupt what excellence looks like. And I think that's the kind of step up, right, of where you really get the kind of transformative change that you need, where there are different types of success, there are different ways that we can be excellent, there are different ways that we can be the best, and then it means that different folks have different things that they can aspire to, but there's a broader sense of what success looks like, there's a broader sense of what excellence looks like, and I hate to point it out, but it's something, it's the same thing you have in all of these institutions. It's dead white dudes looking down on you, and no offence at all to them, but there must have been other people that were doing incredible things at the same time as them, but these are the eyes that we have following us around the room when we're in places like this. And so I think it's that transformation that you need, but you can do that from inside. And I think it's a great thing, whether it's your foundational course, whether it's what we're looking at for admissions across the university, there's actually more appetite for change than you'd think. Even within Oxford, the most traditional of places that has been around for however many centuries, that actually it's lighting that fire and it's giving folks more confidence to say, do you know what, I'm already here, I've got the safety net of having been here. If I change things, no one's going to be able to hold that against me because I've changed it while I was here with the power and the agency and the privilege that I have. And I think that is something that it would be great to kind of see folks being able to challenge the university much more on particular parts that, poking and saying, the way that we're doing, if we were going to change admissions and do it across university, there's definitely colleges out there.
Absolutely.
I'm going to sit here and say it in front of the VC as well. There are definitely colleges out there that would be happy to pull admissions, and they'd know it would be for the greater good, it would be to broaden what we have in excellence, and it'd be to shake up the system in a way that it will never be the same again, but it will be much better than it has been already, and it will be excellent in a completely different level and in a much bigger way. So I think there's definitely scope, and there's definitely power, and there's definitely the opportunity to change things up so that then we can have the changes that we've been discussing already.
There's some really interesting research, and I don't know how to footnote because we don't footnote very well in humanities, but it basically suggests that you need 25% of a group to achieve a large-scale cultural change. The tipping point is 25%. Everyone thinks it's 50. It's not. It's 25.
I've heard 30.
And there's I think the foundation courses is part of that tipping point. I think that I remember Hilda's offered me a lower offer, They didn't offer me 3 A's. They said, you know, you've clearly got something, you're smart, there's something about you. The likelihood of you screwing up your A-levels is pretty high because you seem a little bit like you're and that is a disruptive way of recognising excellence. Comes in lots of different ways. And I think Oxford probably does it better than most, but we still have the same people in number 10. We still have the same people who have that story. And actually, you should be in the Lords. You know, you should be in the Lords. We need to kind of just blow this up a little bit in a slightly different way, and I think we can. But one of the things I regret about COVID is that we don't have these unexpected moments in the same way. Everything is controlled, everything is arranged. So Anne-Marie and V would never have talked because these events haven't been happening. We might have been on a screen, but we wouldn't have talked. And I think there's opportunity that comes out of COVID to disrupt a little bit further, I think.
Yes, completely. It has thrown things so off track. I mean, I suppose to be fair to Oxford, it's not the only old establishment that is struggling to change, and lots of organisations are trying to change. It's just often they don't know how, and then it does rely on individuals like yourselves to come in and say, you know, how about it? I mean, being here, did you sense that? I mean, you said it was a welcoming place, by and large. Did you sense that it's ready for change?
I mean, yes and no. Yes, because the students were definitely ready for it. The students were always pushing for it, and the students were always outside, you know, campaigning, always starting groups, always students, like you can't question that at all. They're always applying for grants to, you know, support their initiatives, and students are amazing. And I think that more often than not, you want to make sure that the work that you're doing, your institution supports it, right? That they're behind you 100%. And I think I agree with what everyone else has been saying, is that you can really change what excellence looks like. When I was applying for Oxford, I was seeing a lot of faces that just didn't look like me or sound like me, looking back at me on the website and things like that. But the more that we've had social media and even the YouTube channel, I'm like, hey, this is me, and yes, I might have, you know, darker skin, I might come from a different background, but I'm still doing well, and this still is excellence. And look, this is my friend Lucy, and she looks a different way, sounds a different way, and she's doing excellently. And just showing, like, there are different versions of how intelligence looks, of how passion looks, and how you can be excellent. So I think that the students are definitely ready for change. They want to see different walks of life, different ideas. Like, why would you want to be at a table discussion with the same person saying the same thing? I don't think there's any fun in that, right? If you're going to tell me that this is the place where change is made, where world leaders are created, surely you want all voices heard and represented. No, you don't want any blind spots or to miss something. So invite everybody and let's put it all on the table and discuss. So I definitely think that people are ready for change. They're ready to see different voices, different faces. It's just a matter of how much support is the university ready to give. And I think that they are ready. Surely, I don't know. I don't see why they wouldn't be. And I have a very optimistic mindset about it. I'd hate to think that they don't want change. They don't want to, for example, within diversity or things like that. So I'm going to remain optimistic and positive and see it glass half full. But I think the students, without a doubt, they are 100% there.
It's good to hear. So we've got some questions coming in from people who are listening and watching, and this one is pertinent to what we're talking about. How do we shift the burden of driving change away from minorities? Ruth.
And I think it's about recognising power. So I think that when I was an undergraduate, I wouldn't have thought it was my role to advocate on behalf of anti-racist practice. I'd have gone, well, you know, I'll do the gay stuff, right? And you've got covered black, right? See you later. But I've got more power to tackle racism, and I've got more power because I can talk to white people about racism in a different way, and I can reflect on my own the fact that I had an easier time at Oxford. If I'd been a black gay woman at St Hilda's in 1998, I doubt I would have had the same story. Do you know what I mean? Would I have even been able to apply as a Welsh black girl gay? Do you know, like that? It just would have been too much. And I have to be able to recognise the advantages I've had as a result of being white and use my position to advocate. So whereas I used to talk to lots of LGBT groups about applying to Oxford, and I will still do that, I will now prioritise any request I get from schools that are majority free school meals, majority ethnic minority students, because actually me talking about that is as important, because there are plenty of gay white dudes who've been to Oxford. Do you know what I mean? So where can I use my power? And I think part of it is about people understanding that they have a responsibility to show up in that space. And I'm more aware of that than I used to be because of the discrimination that trans people are experiencing now. And I'm not trans, but there are more non-trans people than trans. You certainly need cis women to be able to start advocating and talking well about trans issues. And so I think us understanding and respecting the boundaries about that space and advocating accordingly is incredibly important. And put simply, there are more white men in a position to advocate on behalf of those communities than there are people from those communities. But I think that's a shift in dialogue about inclusion that is just happening. I think it's a new one, moving away from performative allyship, Black Lives Matter, some of my best friends are black, towards actually how can I create an anti-racist environment and what's my role in that and what culpability do I have in that is quite a different conversation, I think.
I think the biggest difference, so following off from what Ruth has just said, I think the biggest difference going forward is going to be having equitable practice embedded across the way that you set up your institution and the way that you run it. And it is about this power dynamic, and it is about who you invite to the table and how much weight you put and how much power you're able to share in certain environments, which I think it can be really uncomfortable. You know, there's this thing of kind of when you've been privileged. I think the phrase is when you've been privileged for so long, equality starts to feel like oppression. And I think it is something where folks need to kind of get comfortable with. Yes, it would have always been you up on the walls, but at this point we now know better, and so we have to look for the difference. We have to listen to the difference. And we have to have the right kind of environments where those folks can trust that if they make a suggestion or if they give feedback, or if there's something that has happened and they're going to call it out, that it's not going to have the big repercussions for them, which is what happens at the moment, which is why folks don't speak out. It's why you don't say it at the time you've been harassed, or you don't say it at the time that the thing happens. So I think it's that word, it's equitable, equity is the kind of thing that we're looking at the moment, and there are more and more tools that we're having for how do you think about the longevity, how do you think about how you're doing things, not for people and to people, but with them. And I think when you start to move in that kind of direction, that's when you get the right kind of change, and that's when you remove the burden. I think the other thing that's super important is the funding. And I think with power sometimes comes money, and I think it's really important as well for us to say it's not about getting the minorities to overwork and carry that burden without having the right kind of support, the right kind of remuneration, the right kind of pay to say, we value the difference and we value the improvement we're going to get by having you do this work at the same level that we value the other folks that are doing the other work to improve this organisation. Outside of academia, maybe it's about making money or the other functions you have in an organisation. But here we're valuing that, and we know that we're going to benefit from it. And so it's not going to be something you do on the side. It's not going to be extra volunteering. It's going to be something we're genuinely going to pay you for, like we pay you for the other things that you're here to do, or we're going to recognise you for, like we recognise you in everything else. And I think until we have that, it will remain the burden of the minorities. We need the equitable practice, and then we need the right kind of funding for these different types of interventions.
Mm-hmm. B, you were nodding. Nodding a lot, just agreeing.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree. I feel like you guys have taken the words right out of my mouth. I think it's about understanding, okay, where does the power lay and how do we get some of what you've got there and help raise and amplify the voices of the people doing this work who are minorities. And I mean, even with the foundation year course, if it had just been us students saying, this foundation is great, please can you do it university-wide, I'm not sure many people would have heard us, but I think having the support of people like Alan Rusbridger, who had started the course, or even the Vice-Chancellor, who's here with us today, it was amazing. I mean, she came to see us at the beginning of the course, throughout the middle of it. There were so many moments that we got to interact with her, and, just her helping raise the voices of what we're saying, and now it's a university-wide initiative, right? And I think had it have just been the students, who we were a group of minority students, us doing that campaigning alone and just trying to push that forward, it would have probably taken 10 years to 15 years, who knows, right? But having the support of people who understand that they know how to enter those rooms where the decisions are being made and help at least bring what we're saying to the table too. If we can't be in there, at least have somebody in there who's at least speaking on your behalf too, right? And using their power for good. So I think, yeah, I agree with what these guys have said, and I couldn't have put it better.
Brilliant. There's another question here about women students are now consistently outnumbering men at Oxford. So I think the ratio is 54% to 46%. But they're still not equally represented in key STEM subjects such as computing and engineering, all being awarded first-class degrees in the same proportions as men. So this is fascinating. So that although there are more women, about roughly 9% more men get first-class degrees than women do. So why? So reflecting on your own student experience, what changes might be needed to address these gaps?
I'd leave STEM to Anne-Marie, but in terms of, I remember in my day, there was discussions that men got more first because they wrote in the first person and were more assertive. So women wrote humanities essays by saying on the one hand and on the other, and men would say, this is how it is. And I took that to heart and took a lot of risks in my essays. So in my finals, and it's a real Oxford sign that at 41 I can remember, like that's so Oxford. But in my finals I got firsts and thirds. So some of my papers I got thirds and some of my papers I got first because I took these high risks, which means I got a good solid 2-1. But I think that I think there's something in that about how you play the system and what you do in order to get the grades and what we value. And my assertions about Gulliver's Travels being a metaphor for, you know, whatever it was, rather than, well, these 3 critics say this and 40 critics say on the one hand and on the other. So I think that Oxford rewards the kind of decisiveness, individual thrust, and doesn't value reflection in the same way. Now, whether that's changed over the decades, I don't know, but we can see from how we value, what we value in politicians, decisiveness, an unwillingness to backtrack and sort of go, well, maybe I'm wrong on that and I'd like to get some more evidence and I think differently. As a society, we value that kind of heroic leadership and decisiveness. So it is understandable why culturally our exam systems reflect that at Oxford as well, and that's how it works. So I think it comes back to the point that Anne-Marie made, is what do we mean by excellence? And one person's excellent strategic insight into anthropology and its impact on, I know that a black woman with different experience will have a different reading of anthropology than a white man will have a reading of anthropology. Which one would get the first in that situation? Well, both should. And I'm not sure the systems are ready to quite acknowledge that those two perspectives that might be different might be equally genius. Yes. So our understanding of what constitutes genii, I think, remains a little bit dodgy sometimes, would be my summary.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, I'll ask you about STEM in a moment, but V, just picking up on what Ruth said about men writing more sort of, this is what I think, and women being a bit more on balance. Was that your experience of how things were marked when you were doing your degree? Does that ring a bell for you, or do you think it's different now?
Well, I mean, with my cohort, we never really spoke a lot about, how our essays were marked and things of that nature. But in class, I'd observe that the guys would just raise their hand and just say whatever. And the girls were more cautious. We were always holding back, but we had the right answers. And the way that the guys would be saying it, you're nodding your head and you think, wait, no, this is wrong. But they're saying it with such confidence and conviction that if you're not actually listening, you're going to believe it. You're going to be like, okay, yeah, that's right. So I think, and I don't know where that came from, because the girls in our cohort outnumbered the boys, but still they felt more dominant in that space. And there were only, 18 in my year that were studying my degree, but still I felt that presence of the guys more than the girls. So, I mean, and I guess that is reflective in the way that we write. Like you said, we might write with more caution because we're debating everything, and I'm not sure how to answer that, truthfully.
No. So it's still up for debate, really, isn't it? Clearly, it's still sort of going on. Anne-Marie, STEM.
How long do you have?
Not that long. Not that long.
I've dedicated my life to
please.
this. I think the gap, so the attainment gap, just a quick thing on the attainment gap. I think there's something that's different and we can't generalise, right? So it's not all women. Women tend to do X, Y, and Z, but I think there's also the perception, which sometimes does come in. If you're the one presenting it, the person might be looking at you as the woman saying this, whereas when the boy says the same thing, that also can be perceived very differently, and that does impact elements of how you then feel and what you then end up writing in your finals and the rest of it. So there's quite a lot at play. In terms of STEM, this is not an Oxford-specific problem. And I think I do want to say that, and I do want to start with that. So when we talk about girls not doing computer science, it's not just about the Oxford course, it's not just about Oxford, the institution. A lot of it is about computer science, a lot of it is about the way it's taught, a lot of it is about the way we see it as a society, and the fact that I don't look like a computer scientist. What does that mean, I don't look like a computer? What do you want the computer scientist to look like? Is it Ada Lovelace you want the computer? Of course I don't look like Ada Lovelace, but that's probably not what you meant when you wanted to see a computer scientist. And at Oxford, of all places, what is the Oxford computer scientist going to look like, right? So I think there's something that's quite important about perception and our societal norms and our stereotypes that we have around the course. I think in terms of changing things, the one thing I will say that is Oxford specific is the course itself and how theoretical it is, and how much emphasis and how much priority we put on the old-time theories and the beginnings, and some of it begun here. So I can understand there's a lot of heritage and there's a lot of reason that we'd want to be very close to that. But I think it is something that has been proven and has been done across lots of different organisations, lots of different institutions around the world where, and I'm on the Durham Computer Science Advisory Board, where the way that you face your course, the direction that you turn your course to face in, the things that you prioritise, the things you have as core, the altruism, the creativity that you build into what you're doing versus kind of sticking and clinging to theory and to the most academic element of what's going on, I think that increases the risk involved in choosing computer science at Oxford in a way where girls are socialised to not fail. And so you're not going to take that risk and choose computer science and fail at computer science. Or you could choose maths and not fail at maths and still end up in computer science. Or you could choose any of the other subjects we have across MPLS. So I think that's the very Oxford-specific thing, that if we were able to change that, switch that, look at what's been done at Harvey Mudd. There are a number of different organisations. Look at what's even being done at Durham, where I think it's the adage of if you don't intentionally include folks, you unintentionally exclude them.
I see.
And so I think that's something, there are particular courses where you do have that gap, and it's not just computer science. I believe engineering's in the same, kind of in the same space, physics is in the same thing. You have to overdo it on the other side. You have to say, not only are women and young girls welcome to come and study here, we're going to de-risk it, whether it's with a foundational course, but we're also going to make sure that they meet women when they get here, which I think is the other thing that, like I said, I was super lucky in Keble. You know, I remember I interviewed at other colleges, and it was literally, God will forgive me for saying this, literally Arnold Schwarzenegger at my interview. There's a particular maths fellow who is basically Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's a really intimidating thing to say. I'm going to sign up for the next 4 years, that I'm going to have to do all my maths under this pressure of this person here. And there's less of an affinity that I might have with that person. Or there's no one that looks like me on the other side. There's no one that looks like me as a fellow. There's no one that looks like me that's going to be in my lectures or that's going to be looking after me at practicals. And so you're, again, not going to feel comfortable in that space unless you're the hard-headed, unperceptive Anne-Marie who doesn't care if she's doing maths in front of Arnold Schwarzenegger or V. And so I think it's going to be important for ComLab themselves, as well as the rest of MPLS and across Oxford as a wholesale change, that who are you going to be facing off to? Who is going to be checking what your value or what your version of excellence is? And you don't want, that's not a risk, that's a big risk to take in your whole life, to say the one degree that you're going to choose at 18 or whatever it is that you're going to, you know, throw caution to the wind, and you're going to say, yeah, well, let's see how this computer science thing goes. Let's see where we end up. But yeah, I could talk about this all day, every day. There's so much more that I could have said that I didn't say. I hope
we can sense that, but you know, you're saying that it's got to be conscious. Change only happens if it's done consciously. We've got so many more questions, so I'm going to have to move you on, but I'll bring you back in on other things. Ruth, there's a question here that I think is specifically for you. It says, and I haven't got names from people here, so I'd read them out if I did have. It says, you talked about Oxford giving you the confidence to be out. What would you say to those campaigning for LGBT plus equality in the current context? I don't quite know what they mean by the current context, but anyway.
I think the current context is that we feel a little bit like we're going backwards in terms of LGBT inclusion. I think that, again, like Anne-Marie, I could talk at length. The movement between 2000 and 2010 was studiously assimilationist. So if you're white and gay and you're very sensible and you pay your taxes, it's probably okay to be gay these days. If you're not that, it's pretty rough. And I think that, but what's different is that we now have a political environment of not quite hostility, but certainly not proactive inclusion. So from John Major all the way through to David Cameron, there's been a very positive political context to support LGBT inclusion, and that doesn't exist anymore. What's different is that schools, employers, universities are much better informed than they were and are much more proactive. The backlash against trans inclusion is the like of which I haven't seen before in my career. It is incredibly hostile, lots of misinformation. It's certainly kind of fallen under the trap of a culture war in terms of how that debate is taking place, and the dehumanizing nature of that discussion is deeply concerning. And I think that what I've learned is that we need far more solidarity between minority communities. So what's really impressive is that Black Lives Matter movement is very trans-inclusive, for example. I don't think we can say that the LGBT movement has always been anti-racist. So there's something about how we build those bridges between communities that are ostensibly under attack in order to provide a much kinder way of living and working is incredibly important. So what I would say to LGBT communities and students now is go and form alliances with the anti-racist movements, and go and form alliances with the international movements and the getting kids from working class backgrounds into schools, because all these things are intersectional. You would expect there to be black people in the LGBT communities, and unless we start building those bridges, it becomes very easy to divide and rule us. So let's have a fight about statues, and let's have a fight about bathrooms, and actually those are two from the same playbook of how do you minimise people's concerns about oppression and how do you keep people down. And if we can cut through that and actually talk, well, actually what we're talking about is not statues. We're talking about historic colonial discrimination, anti-racist policies, and we're not talking about bathrooms. We're talking about consistent suppression of people who are not normal in terms of gender norms. Then we can start talking about changing the world. And I think we are being supported to be divided. Through Twitter, which I think is a toxic platform that breeds that kind of reductionist approach to difference, and through the things that divide us rather than unite us.
Okay. Anne-Marie, another question here. What advice would you give to marginalised groups who study/work in environments where others seem to underestimate their intelligence or what they can offer?
Find your tribe. Find your tribe. This is it. Whoever you are, whichever group you're in, my advice is always you're not on your own in this. Even if you might be on your own in that company, you're not on your own in that field. If you might be on your own in that field, which I'm wondering what field that is, you're not on your own in the world. And so I think it's something where it's always find others, because you'll find that safety in numbers, but also you'll be able to see how others are approaching the same issues, the same things that you're facing. But the second one is, if you can, as soon as it's safe to do so, leave those spaces. And it's a controversial thing sometimes to say. If I've been called in by company X and I'm speaking to their women's network and I'm like, all of you go, run fast. But I think if you're being underestimated, there are places where you will be celebrated more than there are even places that you'll be tolerated. And so you want to go to be in those places that you'll be celebrated. It will change so much the way that you view yourself. It will change how you view what it is you're even trying to get done. And we're really fortunate in the world that we're in now that there are options. And if you've got that skill, if you've got that, and I'm talking about STEM in particular here, at least with tech and with maths, if you've got that skill, there are lots of places that that's applicable, lots of places where that will be valued. Not all of them will be obvious, not all of them will be well known, but those places and those spaces do exist. And there are more of them as things move on, as we understand what intersectionality is, and the fact that you can be a black lesbian, trans woman from wherever, the more that we recognise that and realise that and folks understand the market advantage, let alone just the empathy and the humanity in allowing folks to exist in spaces and do something that fulfills them and is their purpose, the more of those spaces are going to exist. So group up, seek those places out. It's like the Hidden Figures kind of film. Right, go and find them, and you're going to work ahead and you'll jump ahead, and when the computers come to take your jobs, your new job will be to run those computers. So skill up, find your tribe, find your crew.
Really straight, clear advice. Brilliant. V, there's a question here. What would you like to see Oxford do to disrupt the norms? We've discussed that in a way. But the person goes on to ask, can we make an institution accountable to implement these changes and not just for box ticking? So, you know, should there be sanctions against the university in some way if they fail to meet certain targets?
I think that we can definitely hold institutions to account. I mean, if you are calling this your university, you're paying tuition fees to be here, you're spending 3 years of your life here, you start to feel like, okay, this is my university too, and you have as much stake in helping see that change happen. And I think it's important to hold, whether it's your tutors, your whoever, like the leaders of the university wants us to see them in a low light. We expect highly of you because you are a great university, so we expect you to be working on these issues. We expect you to be trying to diversify, to be more inclusive. And if we didn't expect that of you, then we don't see you that highly. And I think that's terrible if your students lose trust, hope, and belief in you, right? You want your students to be rooting for you as much as you're rooting for them. So I think holding your universities to account should be, everyone should celebrate that. That's positive. So if they say, we aim in 2 years' time to get X amount of students from X amount of backgrounds, okay, so tell us how you're going to do that. How much money are you putting behind that? How much, you know, how many people are you going to put in touch with us? How many mentors are you getting in place? What are you doing to get to that goal, and how do we work together to do that? Because the onus is not just on the students. And I think a lot of the time students feel that burden of, I've got to go back to my old schools and talk to the students. I've got to showcase around. I've got to start the YouTube channel. And no, like, your university should be as behind you as much as you are behind them trying to get more students here. So yes, hold them to account. Hold them to more than account, you know. Try and schedule meetings. Make sure there's a open way that we can track those changes. We can track what they're doing. And I think if the universities can't embrace that, then there's a problem. Because what are you hiding? Why is there anything to hide? Show the numbers, show the stats, show the figures. And if they're not looking right, how do we correct that? How do we work towards doing that? I think people always say the first way to solve a problem is to admit there's a problem, right? And if you don't acknowledge that, then it's going to be a pretty difficult road. So yes, wherever you are in the world, hold your universities to account. I surely did, and it was great. I got to have conversations with amazing people, and I realized, oh, actually they're on the same side as us. And I think more often than not, students can feel like it's an us and them situation, like we're doing everything and they don't care. And once you have conversations, you realize, oh, there's something's missing here, and we can fill in the gaps together. So hold them to account. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Great. There's a question here about COVID, which has increased the demands on both men and women, but especially women, for childcare, homeschooling, and looking after others. What can universities do better to prevent the responsibility of childcare impacting adversely on women's careers? Age-old question. I mean, in a way, it's not. COVID has exacerbated it, hasn't it?
It has.
So maybe the answer is educate the boys better. But
I think what's really interesting is that it's a really good example of who's in the room making the policy decisions. So when the initial decisions and policies came out around the response to COVID, it was quite clear there was not a woman in a room with children being part of those decisions. Because if there had been, someone would have gone, there's going to be a disproportionate impact on the economy and on women if you introduce these kind of policies around. And I think similarly we saw the response and the disproportionate impact of COVID on people of colour and from minority ethnic backgrounds, again because who's making these policies? Who is applying the lens and looking at who are making the decisions? So it was a really beautiful, pure example of that. I think therefore there's something about PPE, and I should have done PPE, but I didn't know what it stood for. Personal
protective equipment.
Yeah, it does these days start for personal. But I also thought you had to do at university what you'd done at A-level, and I didn't do politics philosophy at A-level, so I thought I couldn't do PPE. But, you know, lots of these people do PPE. And I would love PPE to reflect more on what's the role of collective leadership. How do you develop effective policies on a national and international scale when you have diverse voices? What is the impact of having a reduced lens on the economy? You know, it's assumed that economics is a science. It's not, it's highly subjective. You know, AI is highly subjective. You know, how we make these things is about who's doing the making. And I think Oxford could reflect that in its undergraduate degrees, so that the boys who go on to run the country are a bit more aware of that when they're making the policies around COVID, would be my macro answer. My micro answer is universal basic income and make sure that we have free childcare available to everyone before the age of 4. But do you know what I mean? Like, not going to quite get there yet, but there's something about how we make these policies that needs to change, I think.
Right.
I think there's also something about what we reward. It's what we reward. I think to build on what Ruth said as well, it's also what are the men doing about childcare, the male academics that have, it takes 2 to tango or more, or you know, whatever, however your family's set up, right? So everyone that was involved in those children coming about and the childcare and all the other responsibilities, because it's not just childcare, it's caring responsibilities. There are a lot of things that happen outside of work, outside of academia, and how are you reflecting that in the way that you set up policies, but how are you encouraging folks to carry their fair share? So I think it's also fair to say that we've gone backwards and we've kind of gone towards the 1950s, and if we're not careful, that will be cemented as we begin to leave and as 21st of June and other such milestones come out. So I think there's definitely something around, you know, what is the work that we are rewarding? Are we rewarding folks overworking? Are we rewarding folks not going home and being, you know, and fulfilling those responsibilities? But also, how are we rewarding the different types of work that women do in academic spaces? Which I think is the other thing that gets missed quite a lot, is it's all about the research and it's all about that funding and it's all about, again, that one particular type of excellence. Whereas the work that women do, it's like you've got unpaid labour at home and then there's unpaid labour at work as an academic. It's, you know, the students that you're supporting, the mentoring that you're doing, all the other things, all this kind of minority burden. We need to be rewarding that.
But you think women do more than men?
I think they do more of that than men in academic settings. In academic spaces, they definitely do. The men focus on the research and the big grants and all the things that they know fit into, you know, if we're going to talk about accountability, fit into the systems, right, the things that we're rewarding, the way that we award that funding to academic institutions, it's focused quite a lot, you know, because the rules have been made by a particular type of person, they've rewarded what they recognise in the same way that we had GDP. GDP doesn't include the unpaid labour of women, right? And so I think we've got the same thing where what are we rewarding in our academic spaces? How are we setting up our policies? And I think there's a really good opportunity now for organisations, again, through equitable practice to say, okay, cool, what do the women think about how we do this? What do the women think about what our policy should be going forward? Invisible Women, written by a Keble alum, Caroline Criado-Perez, who I'm sure you've had here at the uni to do a number of different things. You know, there's an example from the book that I always share with folks, and it makes me, I'd laugh, if I didn't laugh, I'd cry. The response I always get when I talk about this, which is, in the US, 80%, I think it is, of single parents are women. In the UK, it's 90% or flipped, but there's that kind of thing. And she's got an example of someone who's a director at a company who is a single parent, and there's a director's dinner. And so you think, it's great, they're a director in this company, is a single parent. How fantastic is that for diversity, inclusion, all the other things you want? And so for them to go to this dinner, they have to book a babysitter. Whereas for everyone else who has the housewife, we're going to assume, because that's the way these systems were set up, you're going to have a housewife at home, they book themselves into the hotel. And the hotel next to where the dinner is an allowable expense, but the childcare that single parent needed is not an allowable expense. And it's so interesting when you talk about things, and some people will nod and say yes. There's people I've said that to who have nodded and said, yeah, actually, I did a trip the other, and I had to pay for my nanny and pay for my this and pay for my kid to come. And I'm like, that's not the point of what I just said. No. Why does it matter what you needed to access that space? Your organisation needs to empower you in the way that you need equitable practice to say, if you need the babysitter or if you need the hotel room, if it's the same amount, it doesn't matter where it's being spent. And so I think there's lots of that you start to look and you have this lens, and it will be really obvious actually what needs to be done if you listen to the women, if you notice that they're there, and if you actually try and engage with what are we rewarding and what are the policies that we have, and do they all assume that you've got a housewife? Because I don't have a housewife and I'm never going to have a housewife, so they're not really ever going to work for someone like me if I was going to be an academic.
Thank you very much. We've just got 3 minutes left, so I want to ask you all quite briefly, And this is a question that has been sent in by someone. If you could go back to your studying years, what is the one piece of advice or guidance you would tell yourself? V.
If I could go back to last year.
So far back.
Yeah. If I could go back to the very beginning, like the day that I came in to start that foundation year, I would tell myself to be more confident and to own who I am and what I'm bringing to the table, because I feel like for that year I didn't really see what I was bringing to the table, because I was so focused on the fact that, oh my gosh, people were telling me they had 5 students per class, you know, and they were learning and finding out about Oxford from the age of 13 and preparing for it at 14. And I'm like, I'm out of my depth here. So I was looking at what everyone else had and like realizing that I didn't have enough, but actually I had more than enough, you know. And I wish I'd had confidence in me, my background, and being more proud of actually, just because I might have had a different path and a different journey, it doesn't make my story or my opinion or my voice less valid. And that was definitely something that was internal, and I wish I'd kind of tackled that earlier, because by the time I found that in my first year of my actual undergrad, I was having the greatest time. I was flying, because when you believe in yourself, you walk taller, you're more present, you know. And I think in the beginning of my foundation year, I was definitely making myself smaller, and I was acknowledging more of those little things that were going wrong rather than embracing all of this, you know, what I was bringing to the table. So if I could go back and talk to V, I would tell her to recognize her worth sooner, because I was contributing a lot to the university, and I think at the time I was just so excited to be here that I didn't even realize that I had something of value earlier on. So yeah, that's what I would definitely tell myself. And anyone else who's about to begin university from a background like mine, or is here and is doubting themselves, don't believe in yourself, and things just start to kind of shift a little, you know.
Brilliant. Ruth.
I wish I'd been a bit braver to go into the spaces that I thought weren't for me. And the most obvious one is the union. So we were talking about it earlier. In my day, if you wanted to get on in the union politically, you had to be really good at wearing those long dresses and gloves. And it just wasn't me. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was never going to be a space. And so I just didn't go into that space at all. I was just like, well, that's not for me. And I wonder whether I ruled myself out of a lot of the opportunities that were available at Oxford. By simply assuming that I wouldn't fit. And I think I was too cautious in that, and I should have embraced it more. I think I'm probably not alone in wishing that I could do it again. I'd have probably read my books a little bit more, watched fewer BBC adaptations of Our Mutual Friend, and wondered what I was missing. So that, you know, I kind of wish it was a bit wasted on me in some ways. I kind of think I could have done. I would do a better job now. I'd be more on it. But I wish I'd been a bit braver, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anne-Marie.
So Ruth kind of took mine, but it's okay. I'll think of another answer. It's like Toots all over again. I'm joking. I would have applied for more aid and more help when I was here. And I think it's something that I had particular friends who maybe were more used to it, or weren't as afraid of filling forms. I did maths and computer science, and I didn't have to write an essay until the very end. And I hate writing. It's still something I have till this day, and I say that with my writing deadline for my new book coming up in the next 2
Good
weeks.
luck.
And it's something that's followed me through life. I still don't fill forms. I still don't write things down. And so I wish I'd have spent more time where it didn't matter as much, I guess, or where it would have kind of helped me a little bit more at times when the student loan runs out and you're kind of living off the £5 big kg pack of pasta, and the handouts from Nando's, because those guys were great, by the way, the guys on George Lane. I would have asked for help more often. I'd have got into that habit of asking for assistance where it was, because there's a lot. I think it's something we don't talk about enough, actually, at Oxford, is there are so many pots of money to help you along with what you're doing, so you can focus on what you're doing, focus on the algorithms, rather than all the other things that you might try to do to kind of raise money to live and to eat.
Because I remember working every single holiday, every single back. I moved into a garret room in St Hilda's and worked in the conference office, and like it was the only way I could do it.
Mine was internships and websites,
and it does have an impact.
It does, yeah. So I would have asked for more of the help, and there are quite a lot of folks I know who even during term time, would go down to London and work, the retail jobs that they were doing before they came up, just to pay for things. So I think
hard.
I'd have asked for more help. Applied for more help.
We could go on talking. We can't, sadly, because we've run out of time. Thank you so much, the three of you, for being so honest, so frank, so eloquent. Three women who are completely unapologetically exactly their own people. So thank you very much. Ruth Hunt, Anne-Marie Imafedon, and V. Kathivu.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rebecca Saronda, and I've had the honour and the pleasure of chairing the Oxford Women's Centenary campaign this past year. And I now have the somewhat sad task of drawing tonight's event to a close. I know that I speak on behalf of everyone who's attended this evening, whether you're seated here in the Sheldonian or you're attending online. We've had several hundred people watching this event online. In saying that we really couldn't have asked for a more excellent event this evening. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel, once again to Ruth Hunt, to Anne-Marie Imafedon, and to V. Kathivu, with our expert moderator, Reeta Chakrabarti, for making time in their busy schedules to participate this evening. Rita took some of the adjectives out of what I was going to say, but thank you so much for your, just by your presence, actually demonstrating the power of Oxford women's achievement. I think you've just done that by being here this evening, but also for sharing your expertise, your insights so openly, and for challenging Oxford to continue to be bold in our ambitions and our actions. When we began thinking about how to commemorate the milestone of women students being admitted formally to Oxford, there was a strong consensus that we didn't want it to be only a self-congratulatory celebration. It is, of course, hugely important to acknowledge the significance of what had been achieved and to recognise that change of this kind does not automatically happen. It's not some inevitable social evolution. It was a long and hard-fought battle against prevailing norms and vested interests. And so it is important to pay tribute to those who contributed and were successful in that fight. But we also wanted to be clear that what happened in 1920 was, of course, not an end point, but one stage in an ongoing process. And as the discussions here tonight have highlighted, despite the remarkable advances that have taken place in the course of the last century, challenges for women's education and gender equality more generally do continue. They exist across the sector and they exist here at Oxford. And to that extent, we really hope that the various activities taking place across the collegiate university, as well as tonight's event, not only reflect on the significance of 1920, but also serve as a platform for ongoing reflection, debate and analysis. What are the barriers to full gender equality within academia that we face today? And what should the goals and the ambitions, the strategies and the mechanisms be for women's second century at Oxford and beyond? Thank you so much for attending, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion this evening, and I hope you will be motivated to continue engaging with these questions. And for those of you who are members of the university, that you'll continue to work to ensure that Oxford's commitment to achieving full equality and diversity and inclusion is realised. Thank you so much.